Dah. Okey, kita boleh mulakan sekarang. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi dan selamat datang kepada semua yang hadir. Hari ini kita akan mengadakan ceramah kelima dalam siri ceramah anjuran istek tentang Manuscript Melayu. Ceramah akan disampaikan dalam bahasa Inggeris. Sebelum kita mulakan ceramah, saya ingin menayangkan satu buku kamus lama yang tersimpan di perpustakaan Istek, dan ini merupakan suatu khazanah yang sepatutnya diketahui dan dikaji, sebab sejarah bahasa Melayu pada zaman dahulu banyak boleh dia kaji melalui kamus-kamus lama, dan kamus ini dia kumpulkan oleh seorang Inggeris, yang Inggeris, dan dicetak di Inggeris juga. Kita cuba lihat video tentang kamus ini. Dipersilakan. itulah tayangan pendek tentang satu buku nadir atau rare book dalam koleksi Istek, dan kita inginlah berusaha untuk mewar-warkan koleksi di Istek yang amat berharga ini. So sekarang kita pergi kepada matlamat kita pada hari ini, iaitu ceramah Manuscript Melayu kelima. Welcome to all who are attending this session. So this is the 5th session of the lecture on Malay manuscript organized by Istek. We have so far invited 4 lecturers from outside the university, IIUM University, but today we have one lecturer from IIUM who did his master and PhD on Malay manuscripts in the area of Malay thought and civilization. So our guest today is none other than Dr. Megawati Moris, who is currently an assistant professor at the Department of Usuluddin and Comparative Religion, Kuliah of Islamic Revealed Knowledge and Human Sciences, IIUM. She teaches history of Islamic philosophy and ilmu al-kalam, Islamic ethic, belief system and ideologies, and tasawwuf and its development. The topic for today will be Al-Ghazali's influence on Malay thinkers, a study of Shaykh Abd al-Palimbani. This is the thesis of her PhD, which she obtained, I think, in 2016. And as we all know, that Al-Ghazali's influence in Malay scholarship is very, very great. So many Malay writers in the past, when they write manuscript, they always mention in the introduction before the content proper that one of the sources that they are used for their studies is Ihya Ulumuddin. And this great teacher, Al-Ghazali, influenced the Muslims and especially the Malays, not only in the field or in just one field, but in many other fields, because this Ihya Ulumuddin is more or less a kitab on tasawwuf. It covers many aspects. So Dr. Megawati will focus her study on Sharah written by Abd al-Palimbani, and she will describe various style and content in order to show the importance of Al-Ghazali's teaching among local Muslim and the Malays. So with that short introduction, I would like to invite Dr. Megawati Moris to present her lecture. Please, Dr. Megawati.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wan Ali. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First and foremost, I would like to thank the organizer of this Malay Manuscript lecture series, ISTAC, Persatuan Sejarah I saw, and also the Darul Hikmah Library, but especially to Dr. Wan Ali, who invited me to speak in this lecture series, and also chose the topic for me to speak this morning. Thank you very much, and I welcome those who are listening to this lecture. Some maybe corrections which are important to make. Actually, I'm not really a Malay manuscript specialist. My field of study for my PhD was Islam in the Malay world. And basically this lecture is extracted from my book, which was published in 2016, which was based on my PhD thesis, which I received in the 2007. And my master's really was, I specialized in Islamic philosophy, and I did on Mullah Sadra's Doctrine of Asalatul Wujud, which was also published in, I think, 2003. All right, thank you very much. So I will start my lecture with this, with the slides. Can you see the slides, Dr. Wan? Can you see the slides?
Yes, yes.
All right, and you
Okay.
can hear me also?
Yes, yes, yes.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay.
All right, so the title of my lecture this morning is Al-Ghazali's influence on Malay thinkers, with a focus on Shaykh Abd al-Palimbani's translations, commentaries, or I refer them to as Sharah in Malay. All right, so we begin with the topic, which is the influence of Al-Ghazali in the Malay world. So here I'm just describing some of the manifestations, all right, of his influence. So I would consider, and I'm also sharing this claim from other scholars, and basically my work also has proven this, that Imam Al-Ghazali's influence in the Malay world is pervasive, profound, and perpetual, in the sense that and right up until now, we would consider that his influence is great indeed. So the instruction and study of his works in the institutions of religious learning, you know, we can witness that in the pondok, madrasah, pesantren, and mosque. And I've included that his influence is also in the, especially, I mean, I can speak on behalf of Malaysian Islamic institutions, and especially in the International Islamic University of Malaysia, which I teach for example, all right, where we can really see his influence, all right, and where his teachings and thought and ideas are very relevant, and which the students, all right, in the university are still studying, and that is the Islamization and relevantization project of the Abu Hamid Abdul Sulaiman Kuliah of Islamic Revealed Knowledge and Human Sciences. And in this project, and definitely since I teach courses like history of Islamic philosophy, philosophy and ilmu kalam, ethics, and belief systems and ideologies and tasawwuf. So definitely I also emphasize Imam Al-Ghazali's thought and his teachings and his ideas, and all right, in the I can speak for the department in Usuluddin and Comparative Religion. We try to make his teachings relevant, and we apply his teachings to the contemporary context dealing with current issues. And then the second point is that his works are taught within the parameters of Shafi'i faith and Ash'ari kalam. So hence his influence will remain significant for Muslims in Southeast Asia who are generally Sunnis. And in terms of kalam, we are, we are following Ash'ari. Basically, we are the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, which parameters which we share with Imam Al-Ghazali. And it's evident in Malay Muslim religious thought and practice. Muslims in Southeast Asia, who are mainly Sunnis, as I have mentioned, have historical reverence, all right, for Imam Al-Ghazali's spirituality and religiosity, and respect for his knowledge and scholarship. So in that sense, we would think that his influence will not fade or lessen or in fact disappear. Although we can say there's less influential as before, with many streams of thought, all right, and movements which do not emphasize our Islamic intellectual tradition. But personally, I would think that I don't think it will disappear, all right, his influence in the Malay world. So effects felt until today. His books, such as Ihya Ulumuddin, as Dr. Wan Ali mentioned just now, are still being read and studied by Malay Muslims, since they consider it to provide true Islamic knowledge and guidance to right action. And I think after I've completed my study on him, after completing the thesis, I realized that I can safely say that there's no book in there's no house, all right, a Malay Muslim house in Malaysia which does not, all right, have or possess a book which has Al-Ghazali's influence in it, even though they may not have the original Arabic books or the translated books in Malay language or other local languages, but they will have definitely books on religion, on Islam, which definitely, would have taken some ideas or were influenced, all right, the authors were influenced by Imam Al-Ghazali. And I am brave enough to claim that that's how pervasive, profound, and perpetual, all right, his influence is. And his translations of his works continue until today. And I remember when I was doing my thesis, at least during that time, there was a wave of Indonesian translations, all right, translations in the Indonesian language on his books. And they make it very small, compact, very readable, very they arranged it in a very simple and systematic way for general readership. So now we pose the question, all right, historically, what is the form of primary evidence of his influence? The answer is the translations, the terjemahan and commentaries or syarah of local scholars of his works into Malay Jawi. So basically, his influence began earlier, even from the beginning. We can say, and there have been studies and claims that it started from the beginning of the Islamization of the Malay archipelago, in the 13th century, all right, with varying degrees of interest and intensity. But, all right, my study found that the 18th and 19th centuries, and of course, scholars, there were scholars who also claim this, and my study also showed that the 18th and 19th centuries was the summit, all right, the peak of Al-Ghazali's influence in Malay Islamic intellectual history. How did we come to this conclusion is because of the number of the translations and the commentaries, all right, that were available, that were published at least in manuscript or in either in manuscript or in published form. And this sharah, all right, you would say they range from literal translations, all right, to commentaries, sharah, and to original compositions. As I go along in the lecture, you will understand what these various terms mean, all right? Okay, so these writings in manuscript are found in Library of the University of Leiden, National Library of Jakarta, Balai Pameran Islam Sultan Haji Hassanal Bolkiah, Brunei Darussalam, Museum Kesenian Islam Malaysia Kuala Lumpur, and Pusat Manuskrip Melayu, Perpustakaan Negara Malaysia Kuala Lumpur. The largest collection, all right, there is a very important study, and this was very recent in 2021 by Nur Afika and Engku Ibrahim, and they published it. They did a very comprehensive study on the Shaykh Abd al-Palimbani's Cyrus Salikin, all right, and the largest collection of manuscripts, all right, is found in the Pusat Manuskrip Melayu, the Perpustakaan Negara Malaysia Kuala Lumpur, with a total of 48 copies, 9 complete and 39 incomplete. And these figures are compiled from the collection of catalogs from 1987 to 2018. In my presentation, I will give a short description of the style and content of 6 of this genre of important and well-known works, focusing on Shaykh Abdul Samad al-Palimbani's translations, commentaries. All right, this term, I would just like to mention here, this term translations, commentaries. Basically, I think I borrowed it. I can't exactly remember, but I think it was Peter Riddell who used this term. All right, because you can't say it's just a translation, because it also contains commentaries, all right, of the authors, and as we will see, which Shaykh Abd Samad Palimbani's writing, all right, on the Cyrus Salikin, basically like the author M. Khatib Kuzwain, an Indonesian author who did the first study, all right, of comprehensive study of the thought and ideas of Shaykh Abd Samad al-Palimbani. He said that it's an original composition, in fact, all right, you can consider it in a composition, not just a translation or commentary. So anyway, the aims of this lecture to show which teachings of Al-Ghazali's Malay scholar, which teachings of Al-Ghazali Malay scholars transmitted to local Muslims who mostly did not understand Arabic. And that's basically the basic purpose of these works, because the Malays did not understand Arabic. So to see how Malay scholars, and the second aim is to see how Malay scholars used Malay sharahs to interpret and transmit the teachings of Islam to Muslims in the Malay world. All right, so the Malay translations or commentaries, sharah. All right, these are the characteristics. They comprise of Al-Ghazali's basic works on tasawwuf. They are written from my study, but of course, there could be other scholars, but I focus on this in my work, 4 scholars, and in this presentation on Shaykh Abd Samad Palimbani, who were the main proponents and commentators of Al-Ghazali and normative Sufism. All right, I will look at the 4 of them, but focusing on Shaykh Abd al-Palimbani. They were involved as students and teachers in the scholarly networks centered in the Haramain, Makkah al-Mukarramah and Madinah al-Munawwarah. All right, in Mecca and Medina, and I think Azumardi Azras, the Indonesian scholar's work, was very seminal, all right, in relation to showing these networks of scholars, all right, which connect the Arab scholars and those scholars in the Malay world, and how the teachings, all right, were transmitted from the mainland or the heartland of Islam to the periphery. All right. So negara bawah angin, all right, benua bawah angin, which the Malay basically was referred to, and they were spiritually and intellectually connected with Al-Ghazali's stream of Sufism through isnads, all right, and silsilas, the chains of transmission formed from these networks. All right, so I've just showing here a diagram, you know, maybe it would be clearer. So the centuries of teachings inherited from masters, all right, we can see this call, basically it is a feature of the Islamic, what do you call, Islamic education system, that it is all orally transmitted from teacher to student. So when the Malay scholars, all right, became part of this network of scholars, when they travel to the Middle East, Hijaz, especially Haramain at that time, the two, Makkah and Medina at that time, were the two big centers of learning, all right, 17th, 18th century. Then they wrote the Malay Syarah, all right, or translations and the commentaries, which were the fruits of this wisdom and knowledge, the fruits of the centuries of teachings inherited from the masters. So, you know, this shows the authenticity, the continuity, the perpetuity, all right, of the teachings to the Malay world, all right. Then, so this question about whether, you know, they were authentic, because as we know in our Muslim intellectual, Malay Muslim intellectual history, there were also, you know, some claims that there were divisionists, all right, in relation to teachings which were kufur, bid'ah, all right, especially, I will not go into it because that's beyond the scope, but this also to prove, all right, about the claims that, you know, there were teachings, but if you see from this diagram, all right, the teachings which the Malay Muslims, which they were new Muslims, all right, you know, Islam came much later. So where did the knowledge come from? All right, from the Syarah, which came from the teachings of the masters in Islam in the heartland. And then, of course, they were passed to the Malay Muslim communities. All right, so in terms of the contents, the Syarah, all right, most of them, especially the one which, what do you call that, were influenced by Imam Al-Ghazali's teachings, all right, they contain these three, what do you call, three branches of knowledge. And so the text, all right, at least for the text which I have first studied, they began with principles of religion, Usuluddin, and then jurisprudence, fiqh, and then culminated in Sufism or Tasawwuf. So the Malay scholars, all right, emphasize on what were prerequisites or fardu ain of these three branches of knowledge. And as we can see from the diagram, that it starts from, you know, knowing the basics of our faith, our aqidah, and then going higher. And so the nobler and highest level, which is Sufism or Tasawwuf. And for the scholars, all right, in this tradition, followed by also the Malay Islamic intellectual tradition, the reason for this kind of knowledge is najat, all right, salvation, if I may translate it into English, or ma'rifah, all right, divine knowledge or knowledge of God, all right, ma'rifah. And this knowledge is considered ilm an-nafi, all right, ilmu yang manfaat, all right. So they focus on this. So what are the texts? They are definitely for beginners, all right, the ones that have been translated or and commented upon. They are grounded in the Sharia, divine law. Again, here to emphasize, all right, claims that some of the teachings, all right, were kufur or bid'ah, all right. They are grounded in the Sharia, all right, because all the books, okay, start with Usuluddin on Aqidah, and then with faith, all right, then so grounded in Sharia. Then Fardu Ain in Usuluddin, fiqh, and Tasawwuf. That's basically the contents. Tasawwuf is the final aim. Tasawwuf or Sufism is the final aim, but must be understood in terms of the principles of faith and belief, according to the requirements of the Sharia for meaningful actions to be performed. All right, as we can see, our historical, intellectual history, the Muslims, all right, following the tradition here in relation, we are talking about Imam Al-Ghazzali, all right, and his tasawwuf is grounded in Sharia, all right, and grounded in Usuluddin, all right. And I would say that the Malays have over the years benefited from this framework. All right, of course, like we mentioned, there are now contemporary challenges, all right, in relation to this framework of Malay Islam, all right, or how Malay Muslims adhere or view and adhere and follow the teachings of Islam and, you know, understand the Islamic worldview. All right, so the commentaries, all right, some, and I mentioned just now that we will look at 4 of the commentators, all right, the Malay commentators. So I start with Shaykh ibn Abdullah al-Qatani. All right, I won't go into his biographical data and all that, but straight to the text, Minhajul Abidin, translation from the Arabic with the same title. Usually, all right, the Malay scholars, they use the Arabic titles, all right. So far, I mean, they don't give a Malay title. So little of, and in this case of Minhajul Abidin by Shaykh Daud, little or practically no commentaries or expansions. So you would consider it literal translation, like I mentioned, the types of translation come commentaries available. So, you know, basically Minhajul Abidin, so following the original book of Imam Al-Ghazali, the path for those who desire paradise through worshipping and serving Allah Ta'ala, then talk about the aqabat, the obstacles, the enemies, and, you know, we find very few friends when, you know, to help along the way. And then he mentioned about the 7 steep inclines, which knowledge, repentance, obstacles, obstructions, inducements, impairments, praise, and gratitude. And then after the last incline, this will reach the valley of blessings and garden of love until it's finally called to the eternal divine presence and garden of the servant. All right, after the last incline, the servant will reach the valley of blessing. And so basically it's a way, all right, to show the way of ibadah, you know, and then of the challenges that you will face along the way. And then, but finally to show, all right, if we follow the way, and then of course talking about the virtues also and the vices, and then what is waiting for us, all right, after the journey or the struggle. So I just put in some of the images of the manuscript, all right, which I think I got this from the Pusat Manuscript Melayu in Perpustakaan Negara. All right, then the second author is Wan Hasan ibn Wan Ishaq al-Patani, or more popularly referred to as Tuan Hasan Besut. All right, and he wrote the Ayyuhal Walad, another important work of Imam Al-Ghazali. It's also a literal translation from the Arabic with the same title. And this book was written in reply to a question from Al-Ghazali, Imam Al-Ghazali's student. So here, as we can see, all right, they deal with standard topics or which follow Imam Al-Ghazali's, all right, framework on tasawwuf, and it's on beneficial knowledge and what would not be useful in the afterlife, concerns which knowledge would be beneficial and what would not be useful in the afterlife. Then again, a signature of Imam Al-Ghazali, which is ilm and amal, all right, the importance of both action and knowledge. And then of course the challenges of walking the path, all right, because basically when you talk, Imam Al-Ghazali, when of course he writes the book, all right, he discusses on doctrine or the teachings, but in Sufism, all right, there's always the doctrine, but there's also the method. All right, strictly speaking, in our Sufi tradition, all right, you can say, using the modern term, you walk the talk, all right, in the sense that there is the way, the path. You cannot just be theorizing, but you also have amal, you also have to practice it, all right. So here, treading the path, all right, in Malay, para kelana, or here, salikin, the one who walks, or suluk, or they call it the treading the path, all right, wayfaring. So the challenges, of course, the mujahada, from the lust of the soul, struggle, you have to struggle against the our animal desires, and the method is through discipline, riyada, all right, and this also is one of the books of Imam Al-Ghazali in his Ihya. Then sets the conditions necessary for travelers on the path, the salik, para salik. And the direct knowledge attained only by the spiritual path. All right, this is also Imam Ghazali's view of knowledge, that he, you can, there's the levels of knowledge, the acquired knowledge, al-im al-husuli, but there's also the al-im al-huduri, all right, the presential knowledge, or this direct knowledge, al-im al-laduni. There are terms which are used, all right, or they say ilmu mukashafa, all right. Of course, in this text, they did not deal with ilmu mukashafa, ilmu al-mukashafa, because Imam Al-Ghazali said in his Ihya also, he does not deal with that. But of course, that is the ultimate aim. All right, so direct knowledge attained only, so they are saying, all right, that you can get direct knowledge only if you travel the spiritual path. Then the third scholar, Abdul Samad Muhammad Saleh Ibn Muhammad Saleh Al-Jawi Al-Kalantani, Tuan Tabal, all right, he wrote the Munabih Al-Ghafilin. Is loose translation of extracts from the Ihya Ulumuddin. All right, when I read the text, I say, is this a translation? Because it's very loose. All right, he did not mention the sources like all the other, Shaykh Abd al-Palimbani mentioned all the sources, all right, in his Siyarus Salikin, Hidayat to Salikin. But basically, it's a loose translation of extracts from Ihya Ulumuddin. and parts of the book of the remembrance, all right, Dhikrul Maut, Wama Ba'dahu, and the afterlife, book on repentance, Tawbah, book of fear, Khawf wal Raja. And then also is extracts from Masharikul Anwar, an important tasawwuf text for beginners by Abdul Wahab Ash-Sharani, another very influential Sufi scholar, all right, from the Egypt, okay, which had great influence on Malay scholars, especially Shaykh Daud Al-Fatani, but also here Tuan Tabal and also Palimbani. He does not mention explicitly his sources. He has a sound grasp of the teachings and translated them in elegant language and reproduced faithfully in a simple and comprehensible style. I think the late Arwah, rahimahullah, Ustaz Uthman al-Muhammadi, I think has written on this text, if I'm not mistaken, but I got the original manuscript from the library of University of Australia. That's how I managed to trace the sources, because if you read from some books, the sources were not exactly the same. So what about the contents? What is required before death and time close to death, and then talk about the Sakratul Maut, on the states of the dead and of those who love God. All right, then his other book is Minhatul Qarib. His translation come commentary of parts of Al-Ghazali's Bidayatul Hidayah, Minhajul Abidin and the Ihya, and Abdul Wahab Ash-Sharani's book, Al-Bahr al-Mawrud fil Mawathiq wal Uhud and Sharaf Wasiyah Matbuliyah. All right, so begins on the excellence of knowledge. Again here, you know, Imam Al-Ghazali, just like in the Ihya, also starts with the Kitabul Ilm. So first section on the, and then on the Aqidah, right? Then first section on the creed of the Aqidah of the Al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and then the fiqh, then the Tasawwuf that is on repentance, and then the adab of companionship, sohbah and social intercourse and vices and virtues, ends with an exposition on the Mahabbatullah and its remembrance, all right, Dhikrullah and the Dhikr itself, the merits, all right, of the Dhikr. So here he also talks about the practice. Okay, then now we come to Shaykh Abd al-Palimbani. All right, he was born in Palembang. This, as we know, all right, those who have been dealing with Shaykh Abd al-Palimbani, you know, his date of birth, his date of death, his lineage have all been all issues of controversy. And the time during when I did my thesis, they were not resolved, and it depends which source you refer to, because you have to write your date of birth, his date of birth, and his date of date of death, and what his lineage. And there were many theories, but I would think that it's quite settled now, okay, quite established, especially from the work of Hussein, all right, Muhammad Hussein Ahmad and Mal'an Abdullah. I would think there are of course others, but they were the main books which I referred to. So he was born in Palembang, South Sumatra in 1719. Before, they thought he was born in 1704. A father whose name was Abdul Rahman. Before, they thought his father's name was Abdul Jalil, but they say that it most probably it was his grandfather, Abdullah, you know. So, but I think now from evidences, all right, from, for example, in this book by Ustaz Mal'an Abdullah, all right, from the discovery of the manuscript Faid al-Ihsani, all right, by third generation writer, a woman of Shaykh Abdul Samad al-Palimbani. I think we can clearly establish that he was born in 1719, and his father was Abdul Rahman, who was most likely a religious scholar, and his lineage was from Sana'a, all right, from Yemen, and of course, Palimbang woman. But apparently, all right, they say that he is not a Sayyid. Before we thought he was a member of Sada of the Yemen, but actually they say they have at least, all right, Dr. Hussein says that he's not a Sayyid, and most likely acquired his early education in Palimbang, Aceh and Patani as common practice at that time. He was sent to further his studies in the Haramain. He also widely traveled Zabit in Yemen, Cairo in Egypt, and Damascus in Syria. Oh, okay, I did not, this is not what do you call finalized, but it's all right. So some of his famous teachers were Sulaiman al-Kurdi, and his Sufi Sheikh, you would say, Muhammad ibn Abdul Karim as-Samani, who gave him the Khilafah, all right, to become the Khalifa of the Samaniya Tariqah in the Malay world. And then, okay, this is not the final version, I'm very sorry, but anyway, he was the first Malay scholar to be included in the Arabic Biographical Dictionary. All right, this was a claim by Azumardi Azra, and also Dr. Azumardi Azra and Dr. Hussein, what do you call Dr. Hussein? Muhammad Hussein Ahmad. All right, the Al-Tarajim. And so I just mentioned here, I think his student, Abdurrahman Al-Ahdal, whom Shaykh Abd al-Palimbani studied, all right, if I'm not mistaken, his father or his grandfather, and they were a religious family in Yemen, in Zabit, and he wrote in one of the dictionary, all right, the biographical dictionary, if I'm not mistaken, title An-Nafsul Yamani, and here the translation is, he considered the entry, all right, in the dictionary was the very learned friend of God, referring to Shaykh Abd al-Palimbani, the deeply understanding and pious notable of Islam, a productive ulama, and one of the masters of many fields. All right, so a very esteemed scholar with very high credentials and reputation. All right. Okay, like I mentioned, okay, this one was not final. I did not save the final one. So anyway, he's considered to be one of the most productive Malay authors and learned, all right, one of the most learned scholars, all right, or Sufi, one of the most learned Malay Sufi scholars in its intellectual history. That one I was quoting the famous Dutch scholar of Islam in the Malay world, Martin van Brunessen. Well, like I mentioned, okay, I'm very sorry, this is not updated. I didn't save the updated one. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Malan Abdullah wrote that he wrote 23 works, but Dr. Hussein said that he wrote 18, but it ranged from Tasawwuf, Fiqh, Ilmu Kalam, Tawheed, on Marifah, on and also the very important subject, but which we cannot deal with here, about jihad. All right, so because the next point is that he participated in the battle between the Muslims of Kedah Patani and the Buddhist Siamese forces of Siam, all right, because they invaded, all right, Kedah, the Siamese, and he participated, all right, and that's how they established his date of death after that battle. okay, which in 1839, it seems he participated in that battle and died, and was considered a Shahid. All right, and the relevance here in relation to jihad, because he did write 2 risalah, I think, 2 texts on jihad, on the, what do you call that, fadilah of jihad, and mention about the characteristics, the requirements and all that. All right, so basically, and he died in Songkla, or in one of the parts, and many people ziarah his makam. All right, so because they have discovered his makam, and they also ziarah. All right, make ziarah. Because as we have no time to mention here, all right, he said to have karamat, all right. So anyway, so Abdul Samad al-Palimbani, Hidayatul Salikin, all right, translation from the Bidayatul Hidayah, Ihya Ulumuddin, Minhajul Abidin, Kitab Al-Arba'in fi Usuluddin. So basically this text, all right, which the Bidayatul Hidayah for Imam Al-Ghazali, Ihya, all right, this text basically are which Shaykh Abd Samad Palimbani considered to be the mubtadi or elementary level, and like, for example, Arba'in is intermediate. But in relation to Ihya, there are books, some books which are elementary, some are mutawasit, intermediate, and some are the mubtadi, muntahi, which is the advanced. So for example, like Kitab Tawhid, what Tawakkul would be advanced. All right. So, and then he mentioned works of Abdul Samad. In this book, also work of the sources are work of Abdul Samad's guide and teacher, Shaykh Muhammad bin Abdul Karim As-Samad, on the teachings and practices of the Samaniyah order. So as we mentioned, tasawwuf is both doctrine and practice. All right, so Shaykh Abdul Samad Palimbani, especially in his Sharah, he also include the practices of the Samaniyah Tariqah, of which he is the Khalifa in the Malay world, and he has initiated many of his students into the Tariqah. Then it contains the Mukaddimah, 7 chapters, and then the epilogue, the Hatimah. Then of course talks again about knowledge, which brings taqwa, takut akan Allah Ta'ala, beneficial knowledge for this world and the hereafter. All right, Nafi, and then as we mentioned, the Aqidah of the Al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and then he talks about the expositions on ilm, and then the practice, which is the dhikr, and he also mentioned the methods of the Samaniyah Tariqah. All right, so then continuation, works by Sayyids and Sufi scholars from Hadramaut. So even though it's a translation of this Hidayatul Salikin is Imam Al-Ghazali's work of Hidayatul Hidayah, but he also include works of the Sayyids from Hadramaut, such as Sayyid Abdullah bin Alawi Al-Haddad, all right, the famous Sufi saint of Arabia, then Sayyid Abdul Qadir Al-Aidarus, as authentic commentators which lend support to Al-Ghazali's teachings and for their local popularity and recognition. All right, so my understanding, all right, how I would view, why did he include all this? All right, because basically they were from the Alawi, all right, they were Ba-Alawi Tariqah, but that means they were also Sayyid, and that was one reason why the contemporary scholars say maybe he could be also a Sayyid, sharing that lineage. But I mean, my own conclusion is that he wanted to lend support to Al-Ghazali's teachings in the Malay world, all right, because this Sayyids from the Hadramaut, as you know, that they came earlier to the Malay world, all right, and basically they were the what do you call, the missionary or the pendakwah, which transmitted were spread Islam to the Malay world, and they were popular and they were acknowledged, all right, to be good Muslims, all right. So that's why I would think he included all this because of also the historical and religious and spiritual connection, all right, between the early Malay Muslims and the people in Hadramaut, Yaman. So it talks about outward piety, ibadah yang zahir, then talking about ibadah, inward piety, ibadat yang dalam hati. Then of course you talk about ibadah yang dalam hati, it goes to the purification of the soul, all right, tazkiyatun nafs, from the vices, the 10 vices maksiyah yang batin, anger, marah, dengki, kasih akan kemegahan, all right, and then of course mention the 10 virtues, the munjiat, all right, which for example is taubat, sabar, love, all right, kasih akan Allah Ta'ala. All right, so this one sample of the Hidayatus Salikin, the manuscript. Okay. This is not made a mistake. Well, never mind. I will say based on my memory. So the Siyarus Salikin, okay, partial translation from the Muhtasar Ihya Ulumuddin in the words of Shaykh Abd al-Palimbani himself, or he says the Lubab Ihya Ulumuddin. So some say the Lubab is a specific title of a book which they attribute it to his brother Ahmad ibn Ahmad Al-Ghazzali, but actually it is the Muhtasar, all right. Well, I mean, so far as we can establish, is the Muhtasar, which is the, what do you call, the abridgment or the summary, which Imam Al-Ghazali wrote himself. And, you know, it has been published, all right, this text, which is the abridgment or summary of the Ihya Ulumuddin, this Muhtasar, which Shaykh Abdul Samad translated and commented upon. And then he took 10 years to complete, all right. He made many editions. What were the editions? Sayings from other Sufis, all right, the Aidarus and Al-Haddad and many others, Abdul Wahab Sharani, all right. And of course, the text also I did not mention here, like in the Ihya, they always start with the verses of the Quran and of course the Hadith, and then the commentaries, then his own short commentaries, and then he also included totally new sections, which we have no time to go into here, but if I have gotten the final version, I did mention what were the big additions which he added. So prologue, all right, superiority of knowledge, principles of religion, again standard contents, norms, the adat of daily life and their rules of ethics, all right, practices of eating, drinking, marriage and companionship, all right, these are the adat, first the ibadat, then the adat, then the munjiat, and the muhlikat, the vices, and then the munjiat, the virtues, that which will bring us to victory. Then sources clearly mention from 3 streams of Sufi traditions, all right. Shaykh Abdul Samad Al-Palimbani, all right, he was very explicit about mentioning his sources and the text. And so if we are students who study his work, we have to go and trace, you know, which the books, and then we have to trace who were the scholars and, you know, the dates and all that. So, for example, the important treatise, the At-Tufa al-Mursala ila Nabi by Muhammad bin Fadlullah al-Burhanpuri. All right, this text is a very important text in the Malay world because of where the doctrine of martabat tujuh, all right, came, and which we know that has been condemned as kufur, or and the what do you call, the Wujudiyah, the followers of the Wujudiyah group at that time were condemned and the books were burned. That is a very unforgettable incident in our Malay Islamic intellectual history. All right, even I'm not sure now whether they have removed the ban, all right, on this text or the teachings. In fact, the text by Shaykh Abd al-Palimbani Siyarus Salikin also was banned during the time I did, and I remember the late Rahimahullah Ustaz Al-Muhammadis said he went to Pusat Islam to defend the book, because I think there was a scholar whose name is Dr. Fatah Harun, who considers the book as ajaran sesat. All right, and this is the text, the Martabat Tujuh. This is the origin of the text, which Shaykh Abd studied also, and he considered this as his main source. But basically the main scholar who studied this was Shaykh Abdul Samad al-Sumatrani, or al-Sumatrai. All right, so as we can see, a text which was considered as ajaran sesat is in one of our great authentic Malay scholars' works, and he could fit in the Ihya Ulumuddin, which is one of the greatest normative, all right, books on Islam and basically Sufism. All right, so the second stream is the Eastern Mashriki or Egyptian, and the works of Zakaria al-Ansari, Ash-Sha'rani are very important, and which he referred to, and the Western or the Maghribi, on Maghrib or North Africa, works connected to the Shadiliyah Sufi order, such as Kitab al-Hikah of Ibn Ataylah, and then the scholars in the networks and movement of reconciliation between Sharia and Sufism. All right, so because he was part of this network of scholars, and according to the scholars, especially Dr. Azumardi Azra, who wrote extensively on this, he said that that network of scholars was their movement, or their attempt was to reconcile between Sharia and Sufism, Tasawwuf. All right, that was the reconciliation. And as we saw, okay, and that it also happened in the Malay world by our Malay Muslim scholars, one of which was Shaykh Abd al-Palimbani. All right, and basically this is one way of reconciling, all right, using Imam Al-Ghazzali, but putting in and grounding it in Sharia, Aqidah, and then also including all the texts of the you would say the higher level Sufis or adepts. All right, those for example, like what you call Ibn Arabi, Futuhat and Fusus al-Hikam, and of course this At-Tufa. And then of course he also mentioned that later we will see he wrote all the register, all right, sort of a bibliography of all the books on Sufism he considered important, and which he categorized into levels. And the highest, and you can see Shamsuddin As-Sumatrani's books, all right, which focus on the Martabat Tujuh, or the different levels of B as to be the highest level. So he may not explicitly, all right, be talking about this the doctrine basically of wahdatul wujud. Basically, the core doctrine is wahdatul wujud, which and then what you call a sort of you would say adapted or reinterpreted into this martabat tujuh. All right, so you can see that he is endorsing also the supposedly deviationist teachings of these other Sufi scholars. All right, so and he Dr. Azimardi Azra is saying that, you know, this is part, Shaykh Abd al-Palimbani is part of that movement, which he called Neo-Sufism. All right, so here now, interpretation, now we come to the final part. So the interpretation and transmission of Al-Ghazali's teachings. What I have concluded is that the Malay commentators, the penceramah, and from the works, very limited, of course, but this is up to the younger and newer scholars of Islam in the Malay world to continue. All right, and definitely, okay, in terms of the relevance in a Malay manuscript lecture series, you know, definitely many of the works are still in manuscript form. All right, they are not edited, they are not published. And so, you know, this is a big, what you call endeavor for Muslim, young Muslim Malay, or not, in fact, scholars of Islam in the Malay world to study, all right, these works which are very important. Okay, and here we found, okay, that they are basically the Malay commentators were creative interpreters and transmitters. They just did not translate, you know, like literal translation. They give their comments and they interpreted. And another thing, which is to educate, but also to solve. All right, my perception of it is that it was also to solve the problems of the time. So Shaykh Al-Palimbani, as the best representative of Malay commentators, selected relevant principles from the original text, interpreted and applied them to local contexts and situations. 30 years, over 30 years he spent in the Hijaz, in away from home. But he always kept in touch and he tried to solve the problems of the Malay Muslims. All right, you can say long distance. All right, now we may have what you call IT. All right, but we have so many forms of very fast communication. But before, all right, it was these texts which were useful. All right, because the Malays didn't understand Arabic. All right, and they had problems as new Muslims. You know, they had problems with, you know, certain teachings. You know, as we know, there are, you know, knowledge has a maratib hierarchy. It's not, you can't say Islam is just made of one level of knowledge. So he made the received knowledge, all right, Shaykh Abd al-Palimbani. He made the knowledge relevant. And this, I refer back to, if there are critics who say, why do we still study all these Malay scholars? You know, they say they are historical. They are in the past. There are many critics who say that, don't waste your time, all right, on studying the works of these scholars who lived hundreds of years ago. They're not relevant. They have, you know, their problems were different from ours. Well, I beg to differ, all right, because he made the received knowledge relevant and useful to the Malay Muslim community, and he was somewhere else, and he was referring to standard texts of Islam, of, you know, whatever dimensions of Islam. Usuluddin doesn't change, right? The principles, tasawwuf, the immutable principles do not change, all right? So for example, here I mentioned, he solved the problem of confusion faced by the Malays on the orthodoxy, all right, of the Sufi tradition and its practices by the Sufi orders. Because as we mentioned, there were problems of the Wujudia. And there was, for example, the two players at that time was Samsuddin Sumatrani and Raniri. Of course, Sumatrani was earlier, but Raniri gave advice the Sultan and Sultana at that time, and then they gave a fatwa that the works of the Wujudia, which included our great Malay scholar of Hamzah Fansuri, Sumatrani, all right, of Kufur. So that was the problem at that time. So, but he solved it. How did he do it? So how did he do it? And there were, of course, we are not saying there were teachings, there were practices where there were the followers who misunderstood, according to Prof. Al-Atas, that of course these our Malay scholars were authentic masters, you know, because they took it from the authentic masters, all right. And if you follow the Isnad and Silsila, all right, all knowledge basically will originate from our Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and then from Jibreel and Allah Ta'ala, the main source, who is Al-Alim, the source of all knowledge. So, so this is, so according to Al-Atas, they were just, you know, they misunderstood, misinterpreted, and some of the practices were basically were not what do you call normative or orthodox. Like they didn't do the salat because there's the level of the shariat, tarikat and hakikat or ma'rifat, all right. And some of them, they did not do their sharia, but they were saying that because they have gone to the highest level of ma'rifah, all right, or they have already achieved hakikat, they don't need to do the 5 prayers. So Ar-Raniri at that time, being the mufti, of course, was concerned. All right, so, but that is a separate topic that we have to do. But Shaykh Abd al-Palimbani, he contributed to solving this problem. He pointed to Al-Ghazali's works as the measure of orthodoxy. All right, so Imam Ghazali, the orthodoxy, meaning the correctness of the religious doctrine and belief, all right, that's basically you would this is the meaning of orthodox, and meaning the people of the Sunnah, people who follow the Prophet, and all the members are the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the consensus. So he points to the Imam Al-Ghazali, and then to the Hadrami scholars who have historically exerted influence on the Malays. They brought Islam to the Malay world. One of the agents, all right, of what do you call conversion. And then he classified, how did he do it? He classified the science of Tasawwuf into 3 levels, which means that its various teachings are appropriate for different levels. So this is how he explained, because there are people who do not understand. They are at the low level, they read the highest level of books. They have no teachers, they misinterpret. And he says that which means, and then he listed down the important available works, about more than 100. I think about 110, all right, Dr. Hussein mentioned 100 titles according to qualification for each level in the hierarchy. All right, so then basically this is how he says that, you know, he solved the problem. Okay, it is not that our scholars who teach, all right, in terms of the Wujudia scholars are wrong. All right, it is basically you have to categorize. Just like in any disciplines or sciences, you have to categorize the elementary, the intermediate, and the advanced. So, and then he says, these are the 100 titles. You know, read that. Okay, Bidayatul Hidayah, which is the translation of the Hidayah to Saliki. That's the lowest level. If you are new, read that book. Okay, then the Ibn Attailas Shadiliyah, who is a Shadili, what do you call, Sheikh, all right, read, this is intermediate. Then, well, if you think you are already at the advanced level, then read your Martabat Tujuh, Shamsuddin As-Sumatrani's book besides. What do you call, Ibn Arabi. But of course, okay, and that's where you get into trouble. All right, so he has certain positions. He says you cannot expose these books to all the Muslims. You must have teachers, you must have guidance when you read all these books, all right, which is very normative in an education system. So, and he says in order to determine, and yes, and this would be our conclusion in the sense that he must have to determine and categorize these books for each stage of study. He must have read them. He must have been well versed for him to say this is this level, and he must have read the whole. He must have had deep understanding of Al-Ghazali's teachings and all the other scholars. And, you know, if you read his scholarship, he has hundreds of teachers, and he has many teachers, and he read with them hundreds of books. And of course, he was faithful to the teachings of these masters, as we can see from the example of the Siyarul Salikin, all right, and the Hidayatul Salikin, all the others, that Shaykh Abd was faithful. He maintained, all right, the framework of the Ihya, the 40 books, the parts, the contents, basically also he followed the general topics. What he included was the sayings, the views, the interpretation of Sufi scholars who came after Al-Ghazali, all right, and then his own, all right, and that was when he put in some of his own views which were relevant to what the Malays were facing at that time. For example, this register of 100 books, categorizing. He also included the 7 levels of the soul, and then he included Martabat Tujuh also. Okay, in the part on the Kitab At-Tawhid wa Tawakkul. All right, you see so how creative he is. But for you to be creative, you must be very well grounded. You must be so knowledgeable that he could fit in the 7 levels of being, the Martabat Tujuh, into Imam Al-Ghazali's book on Kitab At-Tawhid. Therefore, there's no deviation. There's no, it is not something which is strange, all right, or foreign to the framework of Tawhid. So therefore, he is faithful to his teachings. He didn't add, this is his interpretation, and the fact that he could fit in, all right, into the framework of Imam Al-Ghazali's Ihya Ulumuddin, which is considered, all right, one of the greatest works in Islam, which is, accepted, generally accepted by most Muslims. Of course, there were also exceptions, but generally, all right. So, and then the complete framework. So his book is complete because he also included metaphysical teachings, which is that Martabat Tujuh, talking about the levels of the divine reality or of wujud. Okay, how we can view or study, all right, the reality, ultimate reality, Allah Ta'ala, from different levels, all right. And then, so for me, it's a complete framework, metaphysical, theological, legal, ethical, all right. He covered all that. And then was orthodox and normative. Al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, through and through. So now, to conclude, problems faced by Malay Muslims 300 years ago remain relevant and important today. Aren't we still discussing about the different, viewpoints, different movements, all the polemics that's going on, especially on social media about the different trends of thought. Say, we can, like him, respond creatively and draw from our Islamic intellectual tradition to solve present issues. For example, those related to worldviews, modern ideologies, secularism, all right, modernism, issues on the environment, corruption, and other social and ethical issues. Just apply those principles, all right? And you can use the text, our Torah, to solve modern and contemporary problems, all right? Our heritage is not irrelevant, that we are just putting it in the library, putting it in, closed doors, or putting humidifiers and aircon, making them cold so that they are not eaten by the bookworms, those silkworms or what, and not to be, revived, to be studied again, revivication. And that's basically what Imam Al-Ghazzali says, right? To revive the Ulumuddin. We have to do our own revivication also, revive. And I believe that ISTAG is one of the most important, all right, players, contributors to this, because they have a rich collection of manuscripts, which we can study. By interpreting and applying relevant principles derived from original works in the past to local context, contemporary Muslim scholars are able not only to instruct and educate, but to address issues and solve religious and intellectual problems of the day as well. So in this way, they can continue to make the received knowledge relevant and useful to the present Muslim community. Wallahu a'lam. Thank you very much. So, all right. I cannot hear you, Dr. Wan.
Sorry. Okay,
Yeah.
I will repeat. Thank you very much, Dr. Megawati Moris, for your illuminating and interesting talk on this very challenging topic that are related to tasawwuf and tawheed. But I think for me, I get new information that one is that we, as Dr. Megawati said, we should appreciate the existence of manuscript or old kitab that are kept in libraries and museums. We cannot let them be there without us looking at it, because, for example, Sharah by the Muslim authors in the past, they are trying to help the Malays during that period, and maybe relevant to our period, how to interpret, how to classify Islamic knowledge. Maybe during the earliest time, during Hamzah Fansuri time in the 17th century, maybe the explanation was not complete. As a result of that, there was some complication of interpretation. Until what Nuruddin Ar-Raniri said, the teaching by Hamzah Fansuri was kufur. But Doctor was mentioning also that the later the Malay authors like the Sheikh Daw Al-Fatani and all this, they gave sharah. So the sharah is actually not is actually very important for us to understand in the context of Malay what thought and Malay civilization. So I think that is the importance of keeping the Malay manuscript in libraries, and the people now should try to understand them rather than to be kept in the library for preservation. And I remember that our Professor Usman Bakar wrote a book, a thesis, then turned into a book, Classification of Knowledge, whereby one of the subject mentioned was he tried to follow the classification of knowledge according to Al-Ghazzali. And I mean, knowledge, human knowledge, and what we call human knowledge are actually considered part of our godly knowledge, because the knowledge were created by our mind, they were given by Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. So in that classification, I remember even biology, even chemistry, biology, chemistry are all considered as Islamic knowledge, but lower category. So, and in the context of what Dr. Megawati said, is that even in the one Islamic subject like Sufism, the martabat tujuh, there are also categories. Martabat 1, martabat 2, martabat 3. Maybe martabat 1 is for people who want a newcomers to the subject, but maybe martabat 7 is for the experts to discuss among them. So I think it's very interesting, the talk, and also to know that Shaykh Samad al-Palimbani involved in jihad and died somewhere in what, Kedah?
In Songkla, the
Oh,
name
in
of
Sukla. Yeah, that means he is not just an author and ulama sitting down in his house, but he fights. He fights for Muslims in this part of the world. So I think it's very interesting, and for me, it's more like my conclusion to the lecture. Anyhow, I guess there is 1 or 2 questions by audience. Okay, one is from somebody by the name of Muzammil. The question is, what are the main messages in Ihya Ulumuddin? There is one question from our audience, Doctor.
oh, Ihya Ulumuddin or Shaykh Abd Palimbani's?
Ihya Ulumuddin. What are the main messages in Ihya Ulumuddin?
Yeah, I would think that, according to Imam Al-Ghazali, he is talking that in the Ihya, he wants to talk about the path to the ilmu tarikah ila akhirah, the path to the akhirah. And so he divided basically his 4 books, all right, the Ihya, first the on knowledge, the ibadat, all right, the aqidah, which he straightens out first, all right, and then he talks about the adat, like the norms of your daily living, which he includes how to eat properly, how to bring marriage, companionship. And then the third, he talks about the muhlikat, all right, those which bring us to destruction. And basically, all right, are the vices. For example, like we mentioned, Shaykh Abd also followed the same. The anger, ghadab, hubud dunya, love of the world, what else? Ujub, kibr, riya, all those. All right, the maksiat, batin, right? And then he talks about the munjiyat, those which will bring us to najat or victory or salvation, which are the virtues. All right. So of course, in between, he also talks about the soul. Basically, the vices and the virtues are batin. All right. Although the external, the jawari or the our bodies, all right, or our limbs are the ones committing, but the source basically is from our heart, the qalb or the batin, the soul, the nafs. All right. And Imam Al-Ghazali is saying, so, and that's basically, they call his spiritual psychology about his ahlak, because ahlak is just not about the actions, the physical actions on the practical side. Where is the source of those actions? From the heart. Like he says, is the Rabb, the king of the kingdom. He's the one who guides or who points or instructs the soldiers, the junud, all right, of the body. All right, go and steal, or go and read, go and walk to the mosque, or something like that. Also, basically, that whole ihya, all right, is on that. And I would also like to mention here, all right, Imam. So basically, you can say, I would say, it's a guidebook for us Muslims. He gives every, he covers practically everything. What do you call that? Is relevant, what are relevant to us as Muslims in terms of knowledge and practice. But first we must have knowledge, all right, in the sense that then it will guide our action. Like he says, must have the right knowledge, which will guide to the right action. So he talks about what is knowledge itself, and then in terms of as a Muslim, what is the aqidah? The aqidah, the orthodox aqidah, which he follows the sunnah of the Prophet, all right, and he mentions all the principles of the aqidah. And then, but here, as I wanted to mention also in relation to Shaykh Abd al-Palimbani, he says that we just know the fardu ain. The fardu ain of, we don't have to be a mutakallim to go, and in a sense, you must know all the, at this stage of our history, know the arguments for the existence of God. He says we just know the prerequisites, the fardu ain of faith, the tahara, all the psalm, the fasting, the prerequisites. We are not fuqaha. And the problem, I would think, all right, nowadays, I think, I can to a certain extent, based on my observation, the problem is that we are all trying to be fuqaha and mutakallimun. and great Sufi masters. I think but according to Shaykh Abd, in terms of this knowledge, we know the basics first. We don't have to argue like what's going on social media. They go into all this. All right, what is going to bring to najat or happiness, all right, sa'ada, is to know the basic of in relation to our ibadat and which he calls the ilmu mu'amalat. All right, and then what he emphasized, all right, of course, for Imam Al-Ghazali is the heart science, ilmu hati, or ilmu qalb, the heart, and which, of course, is how not to be bad, how not to be evil, how to be virtuous, how to be good, how to be kind, how not to take money, how not to be corrupt, how to be honest, how to earn an honest living, all right, how to be ethical, how to speak properly to people. All these are covered in terms of the adab or the etiquette. That's why, you know, in UIA, Imam Al-Ghazali is one of those ethical thinkers and his works that we study. You know, you have to go back to akhlaq, ilmu akhlaq, all right, which a lot of us forget because we want, you know, we focus on the fardu kifayah of the other sciences. Yes, if I hope that you allow me to speak a little bit more, Dr. Wan, I forgot to mention, which I should. All right, I did my PhD thesis with Prof. Osman Bakar, and basically because you mentioned about the classification of knowledge, which is very important also in Shaykh Abd al-Palimbani's works, but I had no time, all right, and because you mentioned that Prof. Osman talked about classification, and which is very important, which is the classification of knowledge, and he used Imam Al-Ghazali's, Al-Farabi, and Qutbuddin Shirazi's classification. This classification, like you say, is based on the very significant, all right, point is that the nature of the world is hierarchical.
Yes, yes.
Based on maratib. I think that's what Prof. Osman, and I got that also, that very important, very significant point in his work, that, you know, and that's the nature that everything has levels.
Yes, yes.
Levels, right?
Yes, yes.
So, and basically, sure, and that is nature of things. All right, and so Shaykh Al-Palimbani, he used that principle of hierarchy or martabat or levels, maratib, to make his Siyarus Salikin based on that levels, all right, maratib, martabat in knowledge, ilm, martabat in nafsu or the soul, martabat in relation to Allah Ta'ala, the martabat 7. And then martabat also, I think there were 5 themes which I covered. Martabat in relation to the ulama. See, there's also the worldly, according to Imam Al-Ghazali, which he follows, the worldly ulama. And then he talks about the real, all right, the ulama, which he calls them the Sufi or the muhakkikun, right? So he also put them in different levels. So, and finally, he summed up his book that it is not only theoretical. He says that, okay, you can do that, but he also gives the method. For example, Imam Al-Ghazali, kitab Al-Awrad wa Azkar, all right, which in Shaykh Abd also, he mentioned about the dhikrullah. What are the methods? So it looks like it's a complete book, and for me, it's a good manual, a manual for life, I think.
Yes.
Yes, and yeah, Prof. Osman also talked about Al-Ghazali's framework of happiness in relation to psychology. So which you know, because the questioner asked about Ihya. So he is saying that Ihya is also a source book of happiness. So I hope I answered the questioner's question.
Yes, I think it's the answer is very clear, and that because I from time to time read this classification on knowledge by book by Prof. Osman, and so it is now very clear that in knowledge, even in Sufism, there is some levels. Sometimes people probably jump to the highest level without having proper grounding with the lower level. Then they are stuck with
Yes.
a problem, intellectual problem. So, Doctor, I have another question. Maybe this question has been more or less mentioned earlier, but I need to read the question. One is why Malay authors were so influenced by Ihya Ulumuddin. The last one is why Syarah by Malay authors were considered as title of its own or as independent kitab. Two questions. Maybe shall I repeat?
Yes, yes, yes.
The first one, why Malay authors were so influenced by Ihya Ulumuddin?
All right.
Yes.
I think it was already answered in the lecture, right?
Yes.
When I talked about Imam Al-Ghazali's influence, all right. But like in terms of Imam Al-Ghazali's scholarship, all right, his reputation and his call to Hujjatul Islam, okay, definitely, all right. The Ihya is one of the most influential books because, as I mentioned, in terms of the contents itself, and then also, but those in relation to Imam Al-Ghazali as a scholar and in terms of his thought and his books. But there are also external factors because he mentioned maybe he wants to know why Malay. According to Dr. Azumardi Azra, the reason is because that the Malays were part of this network of scholars, jaringan ulama. He says basically in the 17th started earlier, but very became very, what do you call, extensive in the 17th century, where he says the Malay scholars, okay, travel there to seek knowledge, especially in the Mecca and Medina at that time were two big centers of learning. And that's where, all right, all the scholars you can say were all gathered there and they studied with the great masters. But of course, they also traveled to some parts, Yemen, Cairo, and all that. But at that time, was concentrated there. And so these were the scholars who have the isnad, the chains of transmission, isnad and silsila to the great masters. For example, like Sumatrani, I mean, one you would consider one of the scholars like would study under Ibrahim Al-Qurani, for example, who was basically, you know, if you follow the isnad in terms of Sufism, they go back to Imam Al-Ghazali. And then this scholarly networks, also network of scholars, according to Azumardi Azra, also had the isnad of hadith,
yes,
which were also going back, because that is our Islamic tradition, must have the isnad, the unbroken chain, which goes back to, for example, the masters of hadith. And so according to him, he says that that was the time there was this movement wanted to reconcile Sufism and hadith, for example, or the Sharia together. And so the Malays were part of this. So they were they were also in the chain of transmission. So that's another influence, because in the network of scholars, their main chain goes back to Imam Al-Ghazali in terms of tasawwuf, in terms of hadith also. And of course, he mentioned about our own historical, what do you call, affiliation to the da'is, all right, of the Hadramaut, of those who travel from there, okay, to India, for example, and then to the Malay world. And then, of course, in terms of in Palembang, the Hadrami married into royal families, you know, and that's how we have all these Alatas, Asakaf, you know, those what do you call, families from these parts of the world. And because also, why Al-Ghazali? Like I mentioned just now, because of the parameters. Imam Al-Ghazali Shafi'i in terms of faith, and in terms of kalam, Ash'ari. So then we follow Imam Al-Ghazali, because Al-Ghazali was the Sufi, was, you would say, the middle stream, the normative. He is not, for example, like Ibn Arabi or Jalaluddin Rumi, right? So it's not only in relation to his writings, his books, in terms of his scholarship, but also in terms of these historical or external factors which made, all right, Imam Al-Ghazali very influential and attractive to the Malay Shara. And then I think the second question was, he mentioned, why did I say that they were original compositions?
Yes.
I did not.
Why Sharah? Why Sharah by Malay authors were considered as a title of its own?
I'm not sure exactly what is the meaning of that question. As a title of its own?
Why Sharah say say kitab written by Abdul Samad,
yes,
is a Sharah of Ihya Ulumuddin. But why we consider Sharah as a kitab on its own? From what I understand.
Oh, okay. Like I mentioned just now, okay, if I can answer him, because the translations and the, in English, they call, the scholars say, translation come commentaries, because this translations, all right, the terjemahan is not like literal translations only. Some of them are like Minhajul Abidin, very little you know, changes, or Ayyuhal Walad, all right, just translation. But many of the texts also, like we especially Shaykh Abd al-Palimbani, you know, it's not just translation of the Ihya. He said it was the Muhtasar, all right, the abridgment, the summary of the Ihya, but also he also included other, you know, Sufi sayings, and also his own Sharah, okay, his own. So basically, you would consider them to be terjemahan dan also Sharah. And according, I was just quoting to the author, the Indonesian author Kuzai, M. Khatib Kuzwai, who says that actually this Syarus Salikin can be an original composition also. Because if you look at, if you want to, you know, look one by one, like literal, and sometimes if you see the manuscript, there's the interlinear, okay, the words in black and then the translation in red. Yes. That one is word for word, like the harfiah. It's not. Definitely, you can say it is not a literal translation at all. It's not. What happened to all the other things which Shaykh Abd Samad included? So basically, you can say that is also his Sharah, and you can mention also that it's basically very different from the original book. So according to Dr. Kuzwai, he says that you know, you can even say that it's an original composition. If, for example, you did not trace the book to the original author, then you read, oh, it's like an original composition. But of course, our authors consider it as terjemahan. They did say that, because he says, and the purpose was to for the Malays who did not understand Arabic. So I think that's how I would. So there are different, in terms when you talk about terjemahan dan syarah, I think we just have to qualify. You know, it's not straightforward terjemahan, it's not straightforward syarah, some of the text. And I mentioned like Munabihul Ghafili, you know, Tuan Tabal, make the translation very loose. He didn't even mention, you know, the sources, except for some, he said he quote from this, quote from that. So you would consider that an original also, wouldn't you? And the title is very different, which, because he took it from different books.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, Doctor, I think
Yes.
maybe I have to stop it now, because
Yes.
what we
Cuma,
planned earlier was 1.5 hours, but now our session continue almost 2 hours, and I don't want to stop the discussion and the questionnaire, whatever, because this is about knowledge, and we are interested to know in more detail about knowledge that are written by our forefathers on Islam, on Islamic knowledge. So thank you very much, Doctor, for giving us a very important and illuminating discussion. And personally, I feel I have gained a lot from your explanation about these topics. In fact, we can talk a little bit more, because recently I happened to read a thesis by an Indonesian student who studied tasawuf kitab written in Pagan, written in Jawi, but using Sundanese script, Sundanese language. It is about the akhlaq, the teaching of akhlaq that we can derive from Ihya Ulumuddin. But so much we can discuss, but time is limited. So
thank you very much.
Yeah. So on behalf of ISTEC, on behalf of our audience, I would like to express our appreciation and thanks to Dr. Megawati Moris, also from IIUM, for her cooperation and illuminating lecture on this subject. And I hope we will keep in touch from time to time, because her field, Islamic thought and Malay manuscript, is almost very, very closely related. It's very closely related, and we can get benefit from her experience. So with that, I would like to conclude the lecture session, and I hope we can have a chance in the future for another talk or whatever, in order to illuminate this very interesting subject. So thank you very much again, Dr. Megawati Moris.